First of all, everyone, I'd like to welcome all of you for attending and particularly thank our moderator and our guest speakers for taking the time to be with us today. My name is Dave Castles. I'm the president of the Coalition for Canadian Police Reform, and I'm joined by my trusted associate, one of the founders of our coalition, Dr. John Lilly. I'd like to open our webinar today by acknowledging that we are on the traditional territories of the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. An important step in reconciliation is our acknowledgement of traditional land. The Coalition for Canadian Police Reform is a registered charity with one primary vision: to elevate the police profession in Canada. Our mission is to see the creation of a National Centre of Policing Excellence uniquely designed for Canada and established by a special act of Parliament. The centre would be responsible for the development of national, current, and relevant training and education standards for all entry-level police officers. Today's webinar will inform participants of the persistent challenges facing women in policing, framed through the lens of those with considerable practical experience in a field where change has been painfully slow. Despite years of discussions, initiatives, and policies designed to advance gender equality, many of the issues of gender inequality remain entrenched today. And of course, it all starts at the beginning of a police career, and it's an indoctrination into the culture. Today's entry-level police officers receive a short 6 to 8 month paramilitary form of induction training that is very inconsistent from one province to another and without any form of meaningful standards. Current and relevant subject matter is absent from most curriculum. Understanding and eliminate organizational gender discrimination, sexual harassment, and sexual and systemic issues do not form part of the curriculum. Regrettably, this and many other current and relevant subjects continue to be generally absent from the basic introduction of our police recruits to their very important public service work. Every police officer in Canada should have the benefit of critical thinking skills and emotional intelligence skills in order to face the challenges of our 21st century social issues. Now, today, I'm particularly pleased to introduce our moderator today, Dr. Nancy McNaughton, who is a very active member of our board of directors. Dr. McNaughton works with many professional groups within and beyond healthcare, designing and delivering curriculum, assessments, evaluation programs, research projects, and remediation activities. Nancy has worked in police education for over 20 years, and more recently with community mental health care workers. She focuses on the crucial connections between effective communications, problem-solving decision-making, and implementation strategies when responding to people experiencing mental and emotional crisis. She is an assistant professor in the School of Public Health at the University of Toronto and a scientist with the Winston Center for Research and Education. Nancy has said that she will welcome and introduce all of our guest speakers. I'm very pleased. Just before we start,
thank you.
Sorry, Nancy, but just before we start, would everyone please mute your mics? We invite you to submit your questions in the chat for our moderator to draw from. I understand that the questions will be answered following the presentations by all three guest speakers. And again, Nancy, sorry to interrupt, and welcome. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to this session and hearing all of our speakers talk about this really important topic. All of our speakers have distinguished careers in policing, each having served in many different roles at the highest levels of service. I encourage you all to read their full bios in the program. I've shortened my introductions to leave more time for the meat of this webinar. So as Dave was saying, each presenter is going to speak for about 10 to 12 minutes. I'm the time terrier, but I'm pretty bad at it. So if you go to 15 minutes, that's not a problem. And then I'll move on to the next speaker. So we'll answer questions at the end. We'll leave questions to the end, but please put stuff into chat. Please put your questions in and we will have a fulsome discussion at the end. Okay. So our first speaker today is Jennifer Hyland. Welcome, Jennifer. She's a leadership mentor and former Deputy Chief Constable and Police Advocate. Her law enforcement career spans over 26 years, marked by a commitment to excellence, leadership, and the human side of policing. After a notable career starting with New Westminster Police in 1998, Jen transitioned in 2001 to the RCMP, where her leadership led her through the ranks to an appointment as superintendent and officer in charge of the Ridge Meadows in 2021. In Ridge Meadows. In 2021, Jen became the Deputy Chief Constable of the Surrey Police Service, tasked with building the foundational infrastructure for one of Canada's largest municipal police forces. Since retiring in October of last year, Jen has been mentoring and coaching future leaders through her Leadership Lessons program, helping individuals navigate their own leadership paths while maintaining alignment with their core values. So thank you for coming and speaking with us, Jen, and I'm going to pass it over to you. So thanks again.
So can you hear me? I do suffer from technical challenges. Okay, you can hear me. Perfect. So welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us today. I am going to start off with a combination of an experience and a little bit of a lesson I learned before I turn it over to my colleagues who are going to talk about some of the how and the what of how we go forward. So what I want to start with was just tell a scenario, a situation I experienced in IACP. So the International Association of Chiefs of Police has a conference every year. And in 2023, it was in San Diego. And I was there with a contingent of people from my organization. And at one of the after hours events, I had a senior male chief of police who was from another organization in Canada come up to introduce himself to me. And how he did that was by first asking if I was Jennifer Hyland from Surrey, and then he introduced himself. And then he went on to say the following statement: I don't know whether or not you're good at your job or competent at your job, or if you just got it because you're a female. And there were about 8 people standing around me when he made that statement. And 2 of the people were women from my organization. I was with a female sergeant and a female inspector. And generally over the course of my career, I had learned how to manage situations like this where something either degrading or demeaning had been said to me. I had more than enough experience on how to divert, deflect, and even sometimes make light of a comment like that. But at 25 years of service and in front of these future female leaders, I felt that that wasn't appropriate. So I took a deep breath and I said this to him. I said to him, well, I guess I could ask you the same question. And he paused and looked a little stunned because clearly he was not a female and didn't appear to identify as female. And I said, what I mean is I could ask you if you got your chief's job because you're a white male and because you were friends with the group of people that picked you. And he looked a little stunned at first as he was processing what I said. And then what came next kind of surprised me, but he actually said to me, I think I probably did get my job because I'm male. And I'm actually was really good friends with the outgoing chief. And that probably had a role in me getting my job also. And I didn't want to pause and stay in the moment with him any longer. It was an after-hours social event. He had had a couple of drinks. I wasn't really sure whether or not the conversation was going to devolve into something positive or not. And at that stage of my life and my career, having struggled to get to every job I ever had, I was feeling rather irritated and angry that I'd had that experience again at 25 years of service, reaching the rank of deputy chief, that somebody would still say that to me. Now, this man didn't know me, didn't know my career, didn't know anything about me. But I regret now walking away. And you might wonder why I regret it. And the reason I regret it was because I had time to reflect and I thought about what he said and how it made me feel for a long time. But it was clear to me afterwards that what I said to him actually had a significant impact on him because I could tell he was trying to process the information. And what he said back to me was relatively insightful in that he'd probably never been asked in his entire career if he'd gotten his job because he was a guy. So he'd never had that experience before until he met me. But I'd had that experience oodles of times. So I had lots of time to process how I was going to respond, but he didn't. So I don't know that it would have been a fruitful conversation to have stayed with it. But when I looked back, I thought it was an opportunity, had it happened in a different venue, to really engage a senior male leader in a conversation, asking him, why is it okay for you to think that about me? But you are completely shocked when I say that about you in the same line of work because our genders are different. So I was a little bit regretful, but I really thought about it for a long time. And what I've come to ground on is I have seen amazing men and amazing women get leadership roles, and they absolutely are earning and deserving of them. But I've also seen men in leadership roles that have no business being there. And I've seen women in leadership roles that have no business being there. But what I don't see is people commenting that men got their jobs because they are men. And when I look at a line of work in an industry where we are managing promotion in a job selection process, these processes have been made by men for men and haven't put a lot of thought into the advancement and engagement of women into this line of work and profession. Now, when I say that, please don't take it as an insult to the men that are on the line right now. The men that are on the line right now are actually not the men we really need to be speaking to. The fact that you're here and you're showing up to this webinar shows that you're seeking to understand and engage in a conversation. What we need to do is try to engage all the men in leadership roles that aren't at the conferences and aren't on the webinar and aren't seeking to understand and move and advance us forward. So what is the narrative? I think that despite, I was successful in policing despite being female, not because I was female. And I think that that narrative bothers me that it's said. And my story is having to fight and battle to get to the table, not being just given the table and the chair and the whole kit and caboodle. It was a battle. And so I wonder, why does that narrative still exist when women are at the table, that it's somehow been a gift for us to be there? So I'm going to reference, before I finish off, two conferences. I was at IAWP, International Association of Women Police in Niagara, a couple of years ago. By far the best conference I've ever attended in my entire policing career. It was amazing. But probably 90% or more of the attendees at that conference were women, and a very, very small number of men. And recently, Vancouver hosted a Women in Leadership conference, well attended, and by all accounts, an amazing conference. I was not there, but I had friends there. My husband was there. My husband, who's a male police officer, said it was the best conference he's been to in his 30 years in policing. Again, probably 90% of who was there was female. And so I'm grateful for the men that come to the table and are seeking to have a conversation, want to hear what it's like to not be the dominant gender in a line of work, because we actually need them at the table to make change. But unfortunately, what I believe is still missing is the majority of leaders, the dominant group of people in policing that have the authority, the leadership, and the responsibility for both creating and changing the systems that are in place, are often not at the table. And in fact, I believe many of them don't even know that there's a table to get to. And so if we cannot move to affect change without that dominant group there. And so I have been very often in the jobs I've had, the only female leader at a table. And when I've not been there, there's often been no female voice. And so what I think happens is not a sense that men want to affect change and be part of it. They often just don't know how to go about doing it. But one of the most important things to go about affecting change is to be present and be at the table, and not necessarily be there to tell women how to fix it. I can say that women in policing are intelligent, insightful, and passionate about change. They know what needs to be done to affect the change, but they're not in a position to make the change. And so if men don't come to the table, if the male leaders don't come to the table and actually do the research and understand the value that women bring to organizations at a leadership level for everybody. Women getting ahead in policing benefits everybody, women and men together. And so we just need them to be at the table, not to know how to fix it, but to actually help us affect the change. So I'm gonna finish off by saying that while I felt very insulted and demeaned by this male chief's comment, his his ability and willingness, I guess, to say that to me allowed me to be more insightful at a stage in my career, asking the question, if men in his position still feel that women in my position are being gifted jobs, then the men who are in those roles have not been properly educated or heard or informed by the women who need their help. And so, as much as I wanted to walk away, needed to walk away from that chief, if I'd had the opportunity to rewind where I am now and have that conversation, not only would have I stayed in the moment with him, I probably would have said, can we please exchange information? Your comment to me is so important. I really want to sit down and develop this further because I need to understand why you think the way you think. So I'm gonna stop there. I know that there'll be questions. My two esteemed colleagues are going to really develop this sort of topic and thought process further. But I just really welcome the opportunity to share those thoughts, the experience, and what I learned I could do better when I hear those comments about pausing, and it's an opportunity to learn from each other and understand versus me being defensive. And sometimes I think when we ask for change, it's not meant to make our male colleagues defensive about a system, but that we need to understand that they also may not want to adjust a system that has been beneficial to them. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. That's really helpful. What a great start. Lots to discuss there. So yeah, thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to Monique. A brief introduction for Monique. Our second speaker is Monique Rowland, a distinguished former senior police officer with 32 years service. So you started when you were 10. Throughout her career, she's held pivotal roles, including Division Commander of Patrol Services, Investigation Services, and Support Services. Her extensive experience encompasses critical incident command, tactical operations, crisis negotiation, emergency management, and frontline supervision. She's an experienced critical incident commander, tactical commander, and crisis negotiator. Monique has contributed to policy development and training at provincial and national levels and has authored changes to Ontario's Police Act regulations on intimate partner violence and co-authored with Valerie Gates, our next speaker, the Canadian Framework for Collaborative Police Response on Sexual Violence. Since retiring 6 years ago, she's actively involved in an international project improving intimate partner violence response practices for police in Romania, and designs and delivers specialized training programs for law enforcement, post-secondary education, healthcare professionals, and responders across Canada and United States and Europe. So welcome, Monique.
Thank you so much. I don't know if everybody saw that, but I went to click on my notes and I kicked myself out. I'm back before you finish introducing me. So maybe nobody noticed but me. Thank you so much. I want to jump sort of into the conversation following some really important points that Jen made. It really is probably the most difficult role when we're talking about change in a patriarchal system. We are trying to make change system-wide in a system that was never built for us. And so, and it was never built to benefit us, because we know that patriarchal systems, which are rooted in paramilitary systems, were built where dominance and authority was respected in leadership. And so now we are in this position where we're trying to change a system that wasn't built for us. And it's not men, clearly, that we're battling here. It's systems. There are a lot of great feminist leaders of all genders, and that's without question. The problem is, I think, we've been talking about it for way too long. We're talking about equality now. That's equality of fairness. It's where all people, regardless of gender, race, background, have those same equal rights. But we're still struggling in this whole DEI world to understand, that role, that feminist role of equality and voice at the table. It's not about opposing men and male leadership. It's about opposing a system of inequality. And it's about opposing those patriarchal systems. It's not about flipping the power dynamic. I don't want to flip the power dynamic to favor women over men. It's dismantling this whole unfair system. So why aren't we talking more about equal access to success, respect, and autonomy? I think for too long we've been hiding behind this myth of meritocracy. We only promote the people that should be promoted. Everyone is promoted or gets their job based on merit and competence. But we've failed when we look at the definition of merit and competence. We as leaders in the policing industry fall back on that myth. And I think it's a lie that we're telling ourselves that everyone is treated the same. We're not treated the same. We've never been treated the same. And so if we're going to be fair, when we're talking about competency, we need to look at what those definitions are. If the definition of merit and competency is part of a system that is designed for a different gender than mine, then there can't be equality. And so we have to look at how the system is designed and how it changes, or how to change what competency looks like. Because we've been forced to repeat this like only competence counts mantra for years. And I think our leaders do that. And they're failing at it because we can see the numbers. Val's going to talk about that. So instead of changing that only competence counts refrain, why aren't we looking at our definition of competency? Because we know that diversity in leadership, right? Like all of those diversities and competencies contribute to the better performance, innovation, and morale. And we know competencies, leadership competencies, are not based on power and authority. We haven't done well. We can look at the world and we look at dominance over others, and it's not working. And that's what our patriarchal system is telling us. So we need to start asking some questions. We need to look at more women at the table, equal representation. But that's not the only strategy, because equal representation at the table is one thing. But if we're not looking at how we're promoting women or what the barriers are for promotion, because we all falls back to competency again, what is leadership competency, then we're doing everyone a disservice. So who's taking the initiative to look at things like emotional intelligence, adaptability, some of the leadership competencies that we want to see in our leaders as a whole, regardless of gender? Because, and I've said this a few times, I said it in Vancouver, when we're talking about competency and barriers, we're not talking about quotas, we're not talking about abilities. It's not that there's too many barriers for competent women. We have fought to get every job that we've had. We understand what the system looks like and what we have to do to compete in a system that isn't built for us. So it's not about too many barriers for competent women. We've had to overcome those barriers. It's too few barriers for incompetent men. It's the way that the competencies are built that allow opportunities to be given to men in biased situations. We promote people who can come out 24 hours a day and who are given opportunities to excel, and they can say, tell me a time when. Tell me a time when. And so those opportunities are gifted to those high flyers by their counterparts to be able to compete in promotion in a process that is inherently biased against women. And I use the example, if you are a Monday to Friday officer who has taken a courts job or something similar, because you are usually a woman who has to support their family, you are never going to be given those opportunities to excel and tell me a time when. There just aren't those opportunities. But if you're in a specialized unit, a drug unit, a street unit, some sort of specialized unit, there are lots of opportunities. But when we look at deeper than just competency, we look at some of those gender-specific barriers. We know who's going to excel in a process that hasn't been built for us. And so and keep me in line for time, Nancy, because I'm not watching, please. We need to start looking and asking ourselves a little bit more difficult questions about how we're defining who gets these jobs, because it is that gender issue that nobody wants to talk about, the bias that's embedded in process and policy. It is about who advances and who doesn't. But until, and we're not talking about taking out he in a policy and putting they. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about equality and diversity and looking at our processes. What are the opportunities in the competency definitions that are embedded in our processes and that are rewarded? Because what makes the difference between someone who has never been given an opportunity in a non-specialized unit to perhaps excel or have opportunity to supervise others, those opportunities is what we're rewarding. But we're rewarding people by giving them opportunities, and it's specific often to gender. And so maybe we need to look at some of those barriers to change. Why are we rewarding traditional leadership models when we want to move away from them? What are the systemic barriers when it comes to promotion and identifying the true competencies that we want to see in our leaders? There's lots of quiet bias out there, and we aren't doing those specific bias audits, bringing women to the table and asking them, what are the barriers that you've had to overcome that are quiet? There's lots of fear of retribution, and we have been working in a system that we've been adapting to because of the survival within the system without looking at changing our system, without asking some really hard questions. And sorry, I lost my train of thought. I get going and then I lose my train of thought. So just thinking about like some of those lopsided, like cultural norms that are marginalizing women, that the expectation is we will accommodate you by giving you a specific position. So I have a spouse that's a police officer. One of us has to take care of the children. I'll try and get this Monday to Friday job. That's not a reward, or I'm not accommodating you for that, and then punishing me later by not giving me any opportunities to be compete in a process that doesn't measure competency well. And we have to look at rank and power and authority and how it influences us every day in policing, because it's still so paramilitary. And so if we're trying to survive every day in that rank atmosphere, is something I want to do going to threaten the rank of another? Do I have to go through the chain of command in order to be heard, but I get stopped because of rank? Is my rank going to be affected? Is my opportunities going to be affected? It's that constant, I always call it a big episode of Survivor. Who am I aligned with? Where's my power? Who's in charge of it this week? How do I play the game? Not offend somebody? Am I a threat to someone? All of those things are constantly in play. And I think it's just really amplified more because of our gender. And it's time to start asking, and I'll finish with these few questions. What does competency truly mean in a system that is designed to favor one type of leader? How do we redefine success when the current model only rewards those who follow patriarchal rules? And then more importantly, how do we remove barriers that hold women back rather than just telling them to work harder or overcome them or be like the others? Because we're not talking about having a voice at the table if we're being told to be like everyone else. So I don't know where we are with time, Nancy. Are we close?
Yes, we're good. Yeah, you could close up now, and that would be absolutely great. Not to worry. Yep.
I'll turn it over to Val because we've worked together. I see some really passionate response when bringing some numbers, looking at some of the strategies that we can increase our voices at the table.
Thank you. Thank you, Monique. There are a lot of there's a lot of action in the chat. Lots of questions to be answered. Love the way things were being described. People were commenting about that as well. Yeah, lots of conversation to be had. Mario, we're going to keep questions to the very end, so don't lose that question. Don't lose your raised hand. We'll come back to you for sure. But for right now, I'm going to introduce the third speaker, Val Gates, who is an inspector of the Barrie Police Service, which we can see behind her. We love the background there. Inspector Gates is a recognized leader in trauma-informed policing and gender equity in law enforcement. With extensive experience in the Crimes Against Persons Unit, she has led investigations in complex cases in sexual violence, human trafficking, and child exploitation. Her work in this field was instrumental in the creation of the Barrie Child Advocacy Center and the development of Project Safe Horizon, a human trafficking protocol. Throughout her career, Val has played a pivotal role in enhancing investigative practices, advancing policing responses to gender-based violence, and leading strategic initiatives that support women in law enforcement. She co-authored the Canadian Framework for Collaborative Police Response on Sexual Violence and contributed to the Canadian Framework for Trauma-Informed Response in Policing, launched by the CACP in 2024. A passionate advocate for equitable and inclusive policing, Val is committed to encouraging more women to pursue policing careers, while also helping agencies build supportive cultures that retain and advance women throughout their careers. Thank you. Welcome, Val.
Perfect. Thank you, Nancy. And I'm just going to pull up some slides here because unlike my esteemed colleagues, I really need them to be on track. So something went wrong with that. Oh, 1 second. We did test these right before, so there we go. Can everybody see that? Okay, great. So as mentioned, my name is Val Gates. I'm currently still working as an inspector here at the Barrie Police Service. And I just want to start out first by kind of reflecting on what we've heard from my colleagues here today. There's been significant discussion sort of around that police culture and the lack of recognition and support for female leadership in policing, despite the fact that that feminist leadership style is really crucial in policing today. So rather than focusing solely on those cultural challenges, I'm going to take a bit of a different approach and explore the research, what the research says on women in policing, along with some of the stats from Canada. And then I'm going to shift the discussion towards a path forward, outlining some strategies to build more inclusive police services. And I will end by introducing a new initiative that we're working on in the hopes of launching at the end of 2025. So hopefully I can get through all of this in the 10 to 12 minutes that I have been allotted. So starting with what the research is telling us about women police officers. So we know that women use force less often and it's less excessive. So obviously that is going to improve public trust and strengthen community relationships. We also know that women use discretion to make fewer arrests for nonviolent and low-level offenses. So really that's going to help reduce sort of that over-policing of marginalized communities and support those diversion strategies that a lot of police services are looking to implement and rely on. We also know that women, we see better outcomes for crime victims, especially sexual assault victims. Again, that's going to lead to better victim cooperation, again, improve that public trust with your community for your police service. So research is also indicating that women conduct fewer searches during traffic stops, but when they do conduct those, they are more likely to find contraband. So really this demonstrates sort of that bias-free, intelligence-driven approach that women can bring to this profession. We know that women are perceived as being more honest and compassionate. So that again is going to enhance that public trust and lead to that greater cooperation. And we know that women are named less often in complaints and lawsuits. And research is really starting to show that women are costing 2.5 to 5.5 less than their male officers. So if I were to say to police leaders across the country that I can offer you a course and all of your officers, this would be the result for all of your officers, I can guarantee you that every police leader would sign as many officers up as they can, because these are great results. But we're not talking about training here today. What we're talking about is how can we look at this differently? How can we look at who we are hiring differently, and how can we draw more women into policing? So again, relying on what research is telling us, we really need to focus on that critical mass theory. So critical mass theory suggests that a small minority, so anything less than 30%, that population would struggle to influence institutional culture. But once we reach that critical mass, or that 30%, that's called the tipping point, and that is when real change can happen. So if we can get women to make up 30% of a police service, that can affect meaningful change. And we know that culture change is a key recommendation coming up in numerous research articles across the US, across Canada, Australia. Every single one that I am going through right now is really focusing on that culture and making that a priority for not only within our policing walls, but for our communities as well. So what are the benefits of bringing that critical mass theory, applying it to policing and having women make up 30% of our workforce? So when we achieve that, what we're going to see, and what research has shown us, is that systemical cultural change within police. We're also going to see a positive shift in workplace dynamics. We are going to see, and this one is really important to me, and I heard it, Jen spoke to it too, when women obtain promotions or positions, they're going to be seen as earned. No longer are they going to be tokenistic. And I think for women in policing today and in the generations to come, this would be a huge, huge piece for all of us. You're also going to see that natural formation of mentorships and connections, which is really lacking, and it is mentioned in a lot of the research studies that we need more mentorship for women. And you will see a stronger female perspective in policy development and reform, and that's what Monique was sort of alluding to around promotionals and processes. So I do like to follow that up with, what is it not about? Because you do get sort of some questions on, is it tokenism when we start to bring in 30% of women? It definitely is not about just meeting a quota. It's about meaningful representation to drive that real change. So tokenism and favoritism is not what will happen with critical mass theory. It's not about gender stereotypes. Women are not expected to police differently just because of their gender. It's about valuing those different perspectives and bringing those into the decision making. And here's a big one. It is not about lowering standards. So we're not asking people to compromise their hiring or performance standards. Really what we're asking people to do, and Monique spoke to it again, what are those standards? And is it applicable to the job that needs to be done? So do we need to run 1.5 miles to become a police officer? I've never run 1.5 miles after anyone in my life, but I did when I got on the job. So that was good. It is not about removing men from policing. It's about inclusivity, not exclusion. And those strong, diverse teams include both men and women. And that allyship is so important. It's not about only engaging women in creating that change. It is a shared responsibility. Men play a crucial role. Again, I thank all the men online today for opening up their minds and trying to understand, come from a place of understanding. Jen spoke to that as well. That allyship really is the way forward, and we really need men in the room with us. So what are the stats saying in Canada? So of all police officers in Canada, those that identify as women make up 22.87%. So since 1983, that's grown from 8% to where we are today, with our largest increases occurring between 1993 and 2010. That's where we had a 10% increase. Unfortunately, our lowest percentage increase has been between 2020 and 2023. Those are the last statistics available on StatsCan, so 2023. But we only grew by 0.9%. So we've been pretty stagnant over the last few years of bringing women into this profession. And so when we pull that apart to look at what ranks those officers are, 71.7% of those women are constables. 24.5% are non-commissioned officers, and 3.8% are commissioned officers. And I think it's important to also highlight that male officers make up 67.3% of constables, even though there's a lot more males in policing. So it really highlights not only that need to recruit more women into policing, but that we need to support, retain, and develop them into those leadership roles. We seem to have a barrier at that constable level, bringing women up into those leadership positions. So then I wanted to look at, was anybody there yet? Do we have any services in Canada that have enough women to drive that meaningful change? So this is an article that was published about a month ago. They looked at 75 of the largest police services here in Canada, And they noted that only 9 of those services have enough women to drive meaningful cultural change. So meaning only 9 of them have 30% women or more. So really that raises that critical question. We have the evidence that we've shared. We know the value of women in policing that we showed on these first few slides, and we have those research-backed recommendations. So what is missing? What do we need to do? And then when we dive even further into it by province, so we have this chart here. You'll see the green bar indicates those services that have 30% or more. Yellow is 20 to 29, and red is 19 or less. So that was not a typo. When we actually look closer, even though we had 9 services, we don't have any, there isn't a province yet in Canada that has 30% or more female officers. So although Quebec and British Columbia have higher numbers, that progress, as I had mentioned, has really slowed in recent years. So it really highlights that gap and that need for targeted efforts to recruit and retain more women. So I said I was going to try and switch it to what can we do based on that research that we are seeing. There are some recommendations that continue to come up over and over, and a big one, those hiring assessments and processes, those traditional recruitment methods, I think they may unintentionally favor sort of our male applicants. Physical standards testing, obviously. Interview panels, what do they look like? Are they diverse, or does everybody look the same that's sitting on the other side of the table during those interview panels? So we really need to review all of those processes for biases. Recruitment strategies. So our outreach efforts don't effectively target or appeal to women. To some it may, but you will see that a lot of those outreach, you'll see sort of those tactical positions, rappelling from buildings. We really need to start showing more mentorship and visible role models to help attract female candidates into our profession. Organizational culture, obviously that male-dominated environment can create those barriers. So we really need to address those biases and improve those workplace policies, foster those leadership opportunities for women. That is essential. And then we're having retention challenges. We are seeing that women are leaving sometimes due to that workplace culture or a lack of career advancement, and a lot of times because of that lack of work-life balance. So if we really want to be serious about this, we need to create that supportive sort of family-friendly environment, flexible work schedules. Let's rethink what that can look like for all officers in Canada. And then lastly, this is not just a check mark. It has to have continuous review and accountability. So regularly checking in with those that are experiencing it, bringing them to the table. What can we do better? Where is the gap? And where do we move forward from here? So where do we move forward from here? So the 30 by 30 initiative is a movement out of the US, and it's aimed at increasing that representation of women in policing by 30%, relying on that critical mass theory, because we know that's the tipping point where meaningful change can be made. So it is a very important movement. I believe in it 100%, but I do recognize that in Canada, we have unique policing challenges. And so when considering the 30 by 30 initiative and looking at everything that it stands for, we have now decided that we're going to build on this vision with our own initiative. So we're going to build on the success of 30 by 30 and obviously recognizing those specific, we need to tailor that to Canada's policing landscape. So we are in the process of developing this right now. 30 Forward is going to leverage research and best practices and build on this platform in the hopes that we're going to drive real change in Canadian policing, not just for women, but for all officers. So we're going to establish 30 Forward as a national pledge-driven movement. It's going to be focused on recruitment, retention, and leadership for women in Canadian policing. The goal is not just representation, but impact. So we don't want to just bring women in the door and say, great, we're at 30%. No, we want to build those cultures that are supportive and that empower women to lead. So we're currently in the process right now of conducting focus groups with officers from across the province. We are going to launch this initiative at the Evidence-Based Policing Conference at Blue Mountain in October. So if you haven't signed up yet, please sign up. It's going to be a great conference, and we will be lucky enough to have the co-founder of the US 30 by 30 initiative in attendance to help us launch this initiative there. So as part of this initiative, we are going to encourage police leaders to take a pledge. And this is going to be a pledge to take actionable steps towards gender equity. And the content will include such things as that commitment to 30% representation, that promise to review the hiring, the promotion, and the workplace policies to support equity. There's going to be a dedication to mentorship, sponsorship, and allyship as part of this initiative as well for women officers, and that focus on cultural change, eliminating those biases and harassment and exclusion. So we'll be launching that, as I said, in October. We would love to have anybody here that's interested in learning more about that. But before I go, I'm just going to leave you with this, and I don't know, I think I got through my time. This quote from one of my favorites, from Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court when she was trying to get some more representation there in those 9 seats. And she was asked by one of the men, when will there be enough women? And her answer was, when there are 9. And some were shocked by that response, but she reminded them that for most of history, there were 9 men on the bench and no one questioned it. So I believe that we need to adopt that same mindset in policing. When will there be enough women in policing? When every police service surpasses 30%, when women are valued at every rank, and when their presence is at all levels of command, and that is no longer the exception, but the expectation. So I've left my email here. If anybody's interested in getting involved in this initiative, we welcome feedback. We welcome you to join a focus group. And that's it. Thank you. I got through that pretty quickly.
You did. Thank you. That was really inspiring. Thank you. What a lovely way to end. This is really great. So we're now open for discussion. All 3 of those presentations were thrilling, actually. Anyway, so yeah, everybody's got lots of stuff in the chat. I'm aware that Mario, you did have a question. Maybe before we go to the chat questions, and maybe before we even go to Mario, is there anything that the panelists would like to say after what they've heard each other present on? Is there anything that?
Just one thing I wanted to say, Nancy. I looked in the content of the comments.
Yeah.
And there was a commenter who said that she heard me speak at IAWP in 2018 on this very subject. It's 2025. I'm still talking about this.
Yeah.
I was talking about it then. At the time, I was still a sworn leader. Now I'm a civilian, but I'm still working in the industry and very passionate about process and development. And I'm still struggling with this same topic. It is glacially slow. Of course, I've seen change since my career started, late 80s, I know, but not enough. We're not keeping up, and it's the same conversation, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Mario for this question because you've been hanging in there, and then I'm going to come back to the chat. Mario, what did you have to? Just unmute if you can. You're just muted there.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. This is not a policing only issue. Many industries, many organizations have struggled with similar issues through racism, through gender, through local beliefs, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I worked in an industry that went through the transition that you guys are embarking on. And there's a couple of key thoughts that you might want to keep in mind as you move forward. A lot of what I heard is issues with psychological safety. People should be allowed to learn, become members of the team, how to collaborate, how to contribute, and most importantly, how to challenge and be challenged without falling apart. I'm not saying that people don't do that, because industries thrive on that. And some industries that are particularly sensitive have to insist and develop that cultural environment. The resilience of an organization, the resilience of people, depends on how people feel as part of the team, whether it was a formality, whether it was a leadership, well, let's do this for now and we'll see what happens type of thing. It's got to be embedded in the culture and embedded in the processes and what happens in the organization. There are proven holistic models that do this. This isn't, policing is not the first industry, if you like to use one label, that has gone through and is going through this transformation. There are others, one in which I was particularly part of, won 3 world #1 rated positions. And that didn't happen because we treated people differently and pending their gender, race, religion, or whatever. It was because we all were pulling for the same thing. We were trying to move the same thing. And there was respect for individuals, period. Doesn't matter who you were, what you were doing. If you were a team member, a contributor, and somebody that was willing to get involved and do things and learn and contribute, make things better, it all worked out. That, again, this is not a new science. It's a proven existing science. I'd be more than willing to share or provide information like that to you. My email's on there, and it's something that you may want to consider in your progress through this. And I'm sure you guys will. I'm sure you guys will progress and succeed. I sure hope so. And quite honestly, I wish you all the best, and I think you'll do well.
All right, thanks, Mario. So the question I'm going to come back to is Devon, who said, there's too few barriers for incompetence. Who's got their mic on? We can mute someone. That would be great. There we go. Thank you. So yeah, too few barriers to incompetence. Does anybody want to take that on? I find the idea of competence and standards and how we shift that, the view of what we think of as competence and the standards at which competence are measured. That's where culture lives, right? That is kind of where the rubber hits the road for change. So this idea that there are too few barriers for incompetence, how does that happen? What does that look like? Is there anybody that wants to speak about that? I find it fascinating, especially from the perspective of an institute for education, right? And
I'm happy to jump in, of course. And Jen, I see your hand is up, so go ahead, Jen.
Yeah.
Sure, I'll just go briefly and then Monique can jump in. For me, when we're talking about advancement, and really Val's charts showed about women in leadership roles. So when we're talking about too few barriers to incompetence, I could probably describe the same sort of feature and quality that very, very poor leaders, both male and female, have that allowed them to get in, and it is really human-centric. There are very, very few measures for how well somebody in a leadership job knows how to manage the human relations and the human element of leadership. And done poorly, these are toxic people who don't care about people's home lives, don't care about people's medical issues, don't relationship build, don't understand how to give feedback. So when you make your leadership competencies about how well you know how to manage a crime scene, how well you know how to interview somebody, how well you know how to read a search warrant, how well you know how to read policy, there's absolutely nothing in there at all about how well you know how to treat a human being, lead a human being, support a human being. And so there is zero barriers to toxic, narcissistic, micromanaging type leaders that seem to accelerate in the policing dynamic, because to Monique's also point, these are often the people that are like, I don't need to go home to see the wife and kid and necessarily be there to help with the birthday party. I'll take the overtime. I'll do the overtime. I'll stay late. I'll be the yes, sir, go to kind of human being that gets ahead. And what have we done to find out whether or not they're the kind of human being that our organization wants as a leader? And so for me, when we talk about too few barriers to bad leadership, it's because I've yet to see a process that actually talks about some of those really key things.
Thank you. Yeah.
To your point, Jen, I was involved with the opportunity with a police service to rewrite their promotional process. I couldn't be happier because I did the gender bias initially, and I said, stop rewarding the people that you are handing opportunities to. And the people who are being handed, there was all of this friendship boys club. Stop doing that. Demonstrate your competency, to Jen's point about those leadership. Not tell me a time when. How about what would you do if? And then present a real life situation where you would expect your leaders to step up and be human and be compassionate, empathetic, and reasonable in the situation, and be able to incorporate, legislation and policy and human rights code and harassment violations in a realistic, everyday manner that is respectful of their subordinates. And so let's adapt those questions to what would you do if, instead of what did you tell me a time when. And if we reframed it, we started to see, and of course there were complaints. There were complaints by people who didn't get promoted, who had been building this giant resume and taking courses and, on all these specialized teams. But the people who excelled, who were those informal leaders that we see already within our services, that have that ability, that innate ability to be the leaders. If you want to have a good leader, have someone that people will follow. But we don't have any measure of that success. And so we have to rethink those definitions of merit and competency. And to Jen's point, that's the leader, that's the manager we want, but we don't promote them enough.
And I'll stop there too, if that's okay. And I just want to add that we as police officers and organizations, we really reflect what the community needs and what they want from their police officers. So right now, I would suggest that what they want is transparent policing, where they feel they can trust the police in their community, where there's relationships there. Relationships is a big, huge piece. And the term feminist leadership, whatever you want to call it, we need people who can talk and can go and sit with the children. And I think that's the piece that we should be measuring. It's not up to us within these four walls to develop what they want in their community. And I really think we have to start listening, and maybe it's about bringing in groups to say, what does your police service look like for you? And I think that's what we should be valuing when we start thinking about leaders for the future.
Yes, go John. So yeah, absolutely agree. I think my head's going to fall off if I'm nodding anymore. So this is really quite inspiring. And it brings me to Dave's comment in the chat, which really does bring us back to this idea of the National Institute for Policing Excellence, which is about how do we, at the very beginning, start to embed these kinds of values that then become valuable in identifying what a police officer is, the police officers that we want. Because I'm hearing words like public trust. We need public trust. We need transparency. Relationship, that's a huge one. These are all what people are considering soft skills, but we know for a fact are quite hard skills. They're some of the most difficult to actually engage. So Dave, I don't know if you want to say anything more about this, but you put a great big thing about where the culture begins with recruiting, and then the paramilitary, and then, right? So I'm inviting you.
So the question then is, how do we start to embed this within our police services? And yes, I think, as part of that 30 Forward initiative, that is what we're going to try and build. What do those measurements look like? Do we need to ask services to do a full systemic review? Do we need community engagement within each service? Each service is going to look different. Each service has different needs. But do we need to start from scratch and rebuild what that officer looks like? And we could talk all day on, you know, Indigenous communities are going to need something different than we need here in Barrie. So to make it cookie cutter, we're just going to go back to the way we were. So I don't think there's a perfect definition of what that looks like. I just go back to, you really need to engage with that community. We police by consent. And I know that's been said by others before, but it really rings true. If they don't believe in us, we're not able to police them. They're not going to believe that we can do that for them. And that's going to have some pretty tough situations for us as police officers.
Yeah. Absolutely. Dave, I don't know if you can hear me or not. Okay, that's good. I'm looking at daffodils too, daffies. So more questions, and I'm trying to put up here. Great presentation. Exactly, the competence never truly captures the empathy, compassion, and servanthood required for good leaders. It is all hard skills, transactional leadership skills. Leadership needs to include servant. Yeah, Ken. Yeah. So someone actually asked, does policing have to be paramilitary? Does it have to involve a paramilitary kind of valence, kind of emphasis? And if that's what we're talking about in terms of reshaping a culture that is more open to inclusivity, communication, emotional intelligence, what does that look like? Yeah, Jennifer.
Yeah, I don't think that we should be afraid of having police or anything paramilitary. Because somehow there seemed to be a negative connotation about it. Whenever I've done any research about some of what the actual military do, some of the best examples of humanistic, human-centered care for your people and how those teams excel and people are successful and feel welcomed and committed and healthy actually come from military. But if you look at the way they train them and what they do to coach them into their leadership roles, making sure they understand and care for their people is almost always ingrained at the center of their leadership mantra. And there's just some amazing examples of why did these people go to war and follow certain human beings and despise others. And it really comes down to, again, what we talk about in the competencies is that we don't test, measure, or compare people's intrinsic leadership ability to show to people, I care enough for you, and you know that I care about you, that you are willing to follow me when I say, I need you to stay later, or we need to get this extra work done. And so the paramilitary part of the job is what allows us to have command and control in crisis situations, which ultimately we need to have to survive. If there was another way of doing it, it would probably have been done by now. But I don't think it's not that part of it. I think we've missed out on the best part that the military leadership often understood, because they couldn't be abandoned on the battlefield. And we feel like we don't need to have those relationships because in policing, it's a you come, you go home, you come back to work. But the military group that went into battle needed to have that locked in, or they just didn't survive. And so I think there's more we could learn from that military experience. But again, it just comes back to good leaders care about their people, and their people know that they care.
Yeah, absolutely. Monique, you got your hand up.
I'll just echo what Jen said. We can't work in a non-paramilitary environment. We work in critical incidents and tactical intervention where training has to take over, where leadership can't be questioned. We have that environment. I'm 100% in agreement with it. There's a mantra where the leader should always eat last in the military. I have a background in the military. I get it. But we also have to look at what power and dominance looks like when we're rewarding competency. And so we should not be rewarding the old patriarchal, where men went to war and it was dominance and authority. So you have to balance when the time is right to not question orders. We get that, to the point where what are we rewarding and what are our better leaders? If you had a better, compassionate, transparent, empathetic leader who could still balance the paramilitary role, then we're going to be successful. It's just that we're constantly pushing women out of those roles because of the traditional identifiers of dominance and authority being those tactical leaders. I train critical incident commanders. I've worked with a tactical team and do all of that. My gender had nothing to do with it, except for having to constantly come from a place of credibility to earn a place at the table. Once I got to the table, it wasn't an issue because of my style. It was getting there. It's the barriers to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things, but one thing I put about which table, like there are so many tables, which is the most important table to get to?
All of them.
All of them when you're starting up. But you're right, you don't want to be included in the lowest table because they're just kind of putting you over there to appease, because now you're at a table, but it's it's not really as significant. So in terms of actually proving yourself, because it sounds like, Jennifer, you did a lot of, you've all done a lot of that, just getting somewhere and then making that really where you are so that people actually appreciate your skill, knowledge, and then moving from there, it's getting to which table in front of who. What's the strategy when you move into a police force? Do you find out who those leaders are, who are actually going to listen, who are going to be supportive, or and because I'm also thinking about retention. Increasingly over the years, I just know so many women police officers who have just stopped being police officers. They've left. They're done, right? So how does that inform retention as well? Jen?
Yeah, quite frankly, every table has value. You don't want to turn your back on any table. So I would say this, every table I was ever at regardless of the rank, I added value to that table. And after I left the rank of constable, I was often the only ranking female at whatever table I was at. But when I look back on some of the difficulties we have with, some of the male leaders who are in these positions right now have been around in policing a very long time. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But what that tells me is those men actually never experienced female leadership. And what I mean by that is they went through at a time where all their bosses would have been men. And now there are women leaders coming onto the scene, and men are experiencing being led by women for like the first few sets of generations. And I can tell you that whenever I left a role, regardless of what rank I was at, and when I even retired, the men that I heard from missed parts of my leadership that were very intrinsically female gender based. Not that men could not have done the things that I did, but I could do the job as a deputy the same as the other male deputies. But the things that I did because I am female were the things they said they were missing once I left. And when I think about the men that necessarily aren't at the table right now, they haven't experienced that firsthand to know necessarily, wow, now I get the value of having a woman at the table. Now I get what they bring, how they dovetail, how they make me a better leader because they fill in a gap, and it becomes supporting and making each other better versus a competition. And so when you say what table do you want to be at, you want to be at all those ranks so that everybody experiences what it's like to have both male and female weighing in on a topic. I will share this one last story. I was the only female at the senior leadership table in Surrey. And I absolutely insisted when we were negotiating our contract that municipal police officers, both men and women, get full paternity benefit top-up. That didn't exist in BC, only the RCMP had it. But because I came from the RCMP, I knew the value of both men and women being able to be off when their children were born for the first year of their life. And I insisted it be in there. Surrey Police Service was the first municipal department in all of BC to top up both men and women to allow them compensation and to be off for a year. Within months of us doing that, Surrey doing that, Every other municipal police department followed suit. They had to because the standard had been raised. But the ability to have made that happen existed long before Jen Highland was at that table. But it took Jen Highland sitting at that top table saying, I insist on this being part of the topic before it actually happened. And then it changed in the province within months for everybody. So that's the way we think differently. That's what I bring to the table. And the men were more than happy to do it. It's just no one ever tabled that in a negotiation before.
Right. Val, thank you. That's great. Val, you got your.
I just wanted to jump in and echo Jennifer. Yeah, don't ever turn down any opportunity at any table. The first female boss I ever had in policing was Chief Kimberly Greenwood. That wasn't until 2015, 2016. I had only been led by men. And so she was the first one in my entire career that started bringing me into tables. So she turned around and started pulling me up through the ranks, and I earned every spot that I got. I know that. However, like I said, when we get to that 30%, that feeling of that tokenistic feeling, I struggled with that my entire career. I struggled with that self-confidence, that self-doubt, because you still do hear it right up to my last promotion in 2021. So I think a piece that we really need to focus on moving forward, and a piece that we really haven't leveraged in the past. And I think it's really just due to the fact that maybe it's the way the language that we've used in the past. We need male allies. That's what's missing. We have been trying to get male allies for years. And we came at it years ago pretty harshly because we were angry. And we probably pushed some men away that they just didn't understand. So I think we need to really be intentional moving forward. And I presented this last week at an AWIP conference, Advancing We in Policing. And they are going to be putting on a course on allyship and how to be a great ally. So that is coming soon. But we really need to be intentional with our language so that we can have these discussions at these tables with our male allies. And I think it needs to be a focus moving forward. That is the difference between the last 30 years and the next 30. It is to have an understanding of what it actually means. We're not attacking men. We absolutely are not attacking men. In fact, we would love to have men at our tables and to have equal representation of men and women. And we would love to sit down and have some constructive conversations, because we have a lot to learn still too. We do still have a lot to learn. And so we just want to open up that conversation, but please join us as allies. That's all I'm going to say.
I was just going to say, it sounds like the conversation for a long time has been either or. It's an either or, this or that. And actually it's a both and. We need both and in this approach that you're talking about. So, yeah, thank you. So Devin.
Yes, I just want to say to our three panelists, listening to you, I don't know why Monique and Jennifer, why don't you go back into it and be a chief of police somewhere, because you're that good. No, you don't want it right now. But no, I just want to say to you, I've been fortunate enough to serve as a chief of police, inspector general of policing. I work internationally now in police and I teach leadership. But I want you to know that everything you've shared here this afternoon, that's exactly how I've always seen leadership. And I think that's why I was successful. So we truly do need you to keep putting your voice out there. I want you to know you have us as incredible support. So anything that we can do to help, we've been the ally all along, but I want you to know I do exactly what you're talking about. So thank you. I've so enjoyed this.
We're moving forward. And I think that National Center for Excellence in Policing, this is the way that this is the direction we're going in. The CCPR is, focused on that. And we need people to speak out the way you guys have spoken today. So I want to thank you.
Yeah, and I thank you for organizing this, Les. I'm happy you made it to the webinar. I wasn't sure you're going to be able to make it. So this is, any last minute, any last thoughts, questions, observations? I so appreciate this. So there's so many. Yep, Dave. Yep.
Just a very brief comment. Thanks to Les Titleman and his committee for putting this webinar together. Les is a member of our board of directors. He's a serving member in New York. He is very committed to what we are doing and will continue to help us organize future webinars. And when you see them, please join us for our webinars. I have really nothing to add. I'm going to just take a risk here and ask if John Lilly is interested and would like to say a few words. And just before John does that, let me say that Mike Federico, our vice president, is also with us. Mike is a former deputy from Toronto and has continued to support and push our coalition's work forward. So, Mike, also thanks for being with us. But maybe I could just pass it over to John if you have any comments.
Well, thanks, Dave. Yeah, exciting webinar, and we'll get the tape processed and posted, and I'll let everybody know. And part of that will include the transcription. There's some excellent comments, and also of course, we'll have the chat available too. So if you get around to looking at that video, like the video, please. Let's subscribe. I gotta try and get us up to 100 subscribers on YouTube, because that apparently isn't a magic number. So thank you, everybody.
And thank you. I just want to say one last thank you to all of you for your presentations. And what I love is that this is it's a very positive, constructive move forward. So Val, the 3030 project, what a lovely way to be able to think about moving what you're all talking about forward constructively in a real direction. It's got a very different kind of tone to it than I think you were saying like 20, 30 years ago. I mean, it really is something that can be done. We're in a very different place. So thank you all. Very inspiring. Very inspiring.
Good. I guess we're just about finished. Nancy, it sounds like we're just about finished. And again, thank you to everyone.
Yep.
I like the 3030 project, or 30 forward project. So if there's some way you can just share it out with your slides with us, that would be very helpful. And we can help support promotion of that also. It's very, very good. Might I ask that if anybody wants to communicate with us with questions, please don't hesitate to email, Nancy, myself, Les. Please look at our website and join as a member if you're not already a member. And if there's any comments at all from Paul or anybody in the leadership roles across the country that would like to communicate with us, just email us or go on our website and leave a comment so that we can get back to you. Again, a very, very interesting and worthwhile webinar. I thank you for all attending. And I might ask that John Lilly and Nancy and Les perhaps, and even Mike, if you wouldn't just stay on so we can do a little debrief. How's that? And our speakers, please, so we can do a little debrief. Yes. Thanks to everyone. And